Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Clay, and I am the Bucks believer. So far in this year's postseason, we have seen the Milwaukee Bucks jump out to an early 2-0 lead over their rival, the Miami Heat, in the first round of the NBA playoffs. And that includes a 34-point blowout win for the Bucks in yesterday's Game 2 of the current series. However, despite it being true that the Bucks have been dominant throughout the first two games, I still think that there is a pretty strong chance that Miami can come back and give the Bucks a real run for their money in the rest of this postseason. There are three primary reasons for that. The first of those is that the two all-star players for the Heat, Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, have not been playing up to their usual standards, and if those two begin to play much better, it gives the Heat a far better chance of contending with Milwaukee. The second reason is that the Heat have been away for each of the first two games of this postseason. For games 3 and 4, they will be returning home to American Airlines Arena in Miami, and that should give them a solid home court advantage, especially when you consider that they will be playing in front of a near full capacity crowd at American Airlines Arena. The third and final reason, which I view as the most important reason why Miami can get back into this series, is that they have one of the 2 or 3 best coaches in the entire NBA in Erik Spoelstra. Spoelstra is a whiz when it comes to making adjustments in the postseason, and I think there are some changes that he could make as this series go on that could make the Heat have a much better chance of knocking off Milwaukee in at least a few games this series than what they have done so far would demonstrate that they can do. The first of these is that he obviously needs to get his team to play much harder. Yesterday, the Bucks out-rebounded the Heat 61-36. Coming into this series, it was expected that the rebound game could be an area in which the Bucks had a significant advantage. They ranked first in the Eastern Conference this year when it came to rebounding, and the Heat ranked last. However, a plus 25 rebound margin for Milwaukee is unacceptable on the Heat's end of things, and they need to do a much better job of crashing the glass. In addition to that, the Bucks were also able to get out on the break frequently to generate some easy shots for themselves at the basket that were rarely contested. The one that really stood out to me was a second half play where Giannis Antetokounmpo closed out on Trevor Ariza on a corner three-pointer and was still able to beat every single member of the Heat back on offense, and Giannis had an easy and one-in transition where we saw Ariza wrap him up for what became a flagrant foul. However, I think that something that got thrown under the bridge a little bit there was the fact that the Heat really failed to hustle back on defense, and that allowed the Bucks to score so easily. Those are just a few examples of the struggles the Heat had when it just came to flat out playing hard in Game 2 last night, and I think that if Spoelstra can get his team to play much harder, it will prevent the Bucks from being able to blow the Heat out in the way that they did yesterday. The second change that I would like to suggest in this video is that he could make a potential personnel change. Trevor Ariza and Kendrick Nunn are 2 starters for the Miami Heat, and I would argue that each of those 2 players has been incredibly ineffective for Miami so far. I think that an interesting idea for Spoelstra could be to bring each of those 2 guys off the bench instead of starting them. He also could continue starting them, as it's not about who starts the game, it's about who finishes it, and he could simply just play those 2 guys less minutes while still starting them. However, the suggestion that I would have would be to start Goran Dragic over Kendrick Nunn. This is a pretty obvious adjustment because Dragic is clearly a better player than Nunn is. That was true in last year's postseason. It was sort of true in this year's regular season, although it was pretty clear that the Heat were giving Dragic a bit of a load off, as he is getting up there in years and needs to have a bit more rest than he did in his younger days. But I also think that Dragic is just a far superior postseason player to Nunn, and it would make a lot more sense for me to see Miami playing him much bigger minutes than they are playing Nunn. The bigger question to me is who would potentially replace Trevor Ariza as a starter. If you were watching yesterday's game, I think you probably know what direction I'm going to go in when it comes to making this suggestion, but I really think that starting Dwayne Dedmon could be a viable option for Miami. Like I said before, perhaps they won't insert him into the starting lineup and will instead simply play him more minutes at a big man position, but Dedmon was really effective for the Heat yesterday, as he finished with 19 points on 9 rebounds while shooting 8 for 11 from the field, and considering the struggles the Heat have had so far, I think that it could make a lot of sense to play him more minutes. First of all, on the offensive end of the court, it is a bit questionable to play 2 big guys at the same time. However, Dedmon has shown flashes of being a three-point shooter in the past, as he had 2 seasons with the Atlanta Hawks where he shot upwards of 35% from beyond the arc. That hasn't been true of him over the past few seasons with the Sacramento Kings and now recently with the Heat, but I certainly don't think that having him stand outside the three-point line to space the floor out is a terrible idea, and Bam Adebayo is a good enough player to still be able to play well inside the arc, even if you have Dedmon sitting in the dunker spot on a lot of offensive possessions. On the defensive end, having Dedmon in the game would allow the Heat to put Bam Adebayo on Giannis Antetokounmpo, which I would argue is a far better matchup for the Heat than putting Ariza on Giannis is. So having someone like Dedmon who could stick with Brook Lopez inside while allowing Bam to slide over and defend Giannis instead could be a positive adjustment for Miami to make. A starting lineup of Goran Dragic, Duncan Robinson, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and Dwayne Dedmon with a bench of Tyler Hero, Kendrick Nunn, and Andre Iguodala would make a lot of sense for me when it comes to the Heat's playoff rotation, and I think that they could at least insert Dragic into the starting lineup and perhaps could consider sticking Dedmon in there as well. The third change that I want to suggest for the Heat is a total scheme change. Let's start by talking about on offense, where I have one particular adjustment I would like to point out, and then we'll talk about the defense, where there is one bit shakier adjustment, but one that I think could potentially come into play. The offensive adjustment is that I think the Heat need to run a whole lot more sets that involve a double screening action for a primary ball handler. The player playing this primary ball handling role would likely be either Goran Dragic and Jimmy Butler, and I think that both of these two guys could play that role to a high level because they are both gifted passers. In this play, one screener would be Bam Adebayo and the other screener would be Duncan Robinson. After setting their screens, Bam would roll to the basket and Robinson would dart out to the three-point line. This would give the ball handler a lot of space to either drive to the rim, pull up for a jumper, or find Robinson on the three-point line or Bam under the basket for an easy layup. Hopefully, if you're the Heat, one of those options will be open, and if they are, you have to trust Butler and Dragic, 2 seasoned veterans, to make the correct choice when it comes to that pick-and-roll play. This look gave the Bucks a lot of trouble earlier in the season when the Utah Jazz employed it to great effect against Milwaukee. We saw the Jazz have Donovan Mitchell as the ball handler, Rudy Gobert as the screen setter and rim runner, and Jordan Clarkson as the guy to pop out to the three-point line for an open shot. The Jazz put a lot of pressure on the Bucks defense as they created a scramble situation where the Bucks had to make switch decisions on the fly. If Miami can put the Bucks in similar position where they're really in a difficult decision-making spot, especially as they struggle occasionally to make communication on screening actions, I think that could be a really beneficial play for the Heat. I also think that they could just straight up run more Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo pick and roll actions that would involve their 2 best players in that primary action. I don't love it because neither of those 2 guys is a threat with the jump shot, so the Bucks could simply have each of the guys that are defending those 2 players drop back into the paint. However, if you surround those 2 with enough shooting, they should be able to generate enough spacing to develop some open looks for Miami. I feel much better about Miami's defense than I do about their offense. I think that they have done a solid job on the Bucks for large portions of this series so far, and really the only outlier quarter when it comes to scoring for the Bucks is the first quarter of Game 2, where they made 10 of their 15 three-pointers. So in general, I think the Heat should be fine to keep going with the wall coverage that they have done so far. However, if they give up another huge three-point shooting quarter where Bryn Forbes can't miss and Chris Middleton has it going from beyond the arc and Pat Connaughton is all of a sudden making some catch-and-shoot jumpers, then we could see the Heat adjust their scheme and go with the Brooklyn Nets strategy that we saw earlier this season, where the Nets stuck DeAndre Jordan on Giannis and made him deal with the Greek Freak in a half-court setting. The Heat could do the same thing, but with Bam Adebayo, as Adebayo could put a lot of pressure on Giannis and is one of the best options to defend Giannis one-on-one in the entire league. Then, instead of helping and bringing all of their guys off of the Bucks shooters, the Heat could instead force Giannis to beat them one-on-one, and considering Adebayo's defensive talent, I don't necessarily think this would be a horrible option. especially when you consider the success that the Bucks have had when putting the ball in the hands of Chris Middleton and Jrue Holiday so far in this series. If Miami can force Giannis to do more of the ball handling, it could be a beneficial decision to make for their defense. Overall, I think that the Bucks are looking really good in this series, and I would probably pick them to win in about 5 games at this current juncture. However, if Spoelstra pushes all the right buttons and can outcoach Mike Budenholzer, I could still see the Heat making this a highly competitive series. Let me know what you thought of this video in the comment section down below. What changes do you think Erik Spoelstra should make? Be sure to leave a like and subscribe, especially if you are a fellow Bucks believer. This is the place for you. I think that I've covered everything that I wanted to cover, so that's going to be it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, I will see you all again very soon.